Hey there and welcome back. Today's video is going to be exciting because if you haven't heard the news yet, Payload version 3 is finally stable. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the new features that Payload has released and that version 3 comes with. And I'm also going to give you a short sneak peek into what's coming up in the next weeks and months. Before I show you the join field, let's quickly set up a new Payload version 3 project. In order to do this, all I have to do is type npx create payload app. And since it's not beta anymore, I don't have to specify beta. So I just clicked enter and it will now ask me for a project name. I will just call it v3 release. I will have to choose a template. I'm just going with blank. I'm going with MongoDB and a local database string. And now it will just install all dependencies real quick. And as soon as that is done, I can cd into my folder and open up VS Code. So here's our new payload project. So in this video, we're also going to create a custom component. To style it more easily, I'm also going to install Tailwind CSS real quick. For this, I'm going to use the official Tailwind CSS installation guide that you can find on the website if you just search for Next.js. We don't need to create a new project. I can just copy this command, go back into VS Code, go to terminal, new terminal. And here I'm just going to paste it in, but I have to use pnpm instead of npm. This is important as of right now. So I'm going to say pnpm install, and then I just have to modify the npx script to be pnpx. And that will initialize Tailwind. Now the only thing left is set the content that Tailwind CSS checks for in the Tailwind config in here. We also need to create a styles file. I'll call it globals.css. And in there, we will need to add our base import. I'm going to leave out the add Tailwind base because this causes some issues with the internal Tailwind styling. So I'm just going to import the components and utilities in here. Then I will also have to create a root layout in my app folder. I'm going to call it layout, or you have to call it layout.tsx. And you can find the code for that in the official migration guide for the app router in here under creating a root layout. I will link to all of those resources in the description. You can just copy it, go back into VS Code, paste it in here. And we also have to import styles globals.css. All right, now we're set up and we can start our development server by running npm run dev. This will start on localhost 3001 in my case because port 3000 is blocked. So I'm just opening it up. Localhost 3001/admin. And the first thing that we'll have to do is create a new user, which I'm going to do real quick. All right. Obviously, my 12345 password is not secure. We're now set up with Payload, and I can show you the join field. For this, I will create two collections, one that is called members and one that is called children. I'm just going to paste them in here to speed up the process. Ignore the commented out lines for now. They will be important later. So what this does is it creates two collections. Here's our members collection with a name and our children field. So the idea is that one member can have multiple children. So what we're going to do is in the child, we're going to store a relationship to the parent. So let's say if our member has 5 children, you would have 5 docs in the children collection that all link back to the parent. Now up until this point, to actually show the children in their member, you would have to create a custom field fetch from payload all the children that have the parent linked and then show them. But now payload can do this natively with the join field. So you specify type join, you specify the collection that you want to search for those children basically. And then you have to specify the field name where the linking takes place to this actual members document. So as you can see in our child, we have a property called parent, which then links to the actual member. So we have to specify the onParent attribute here. So let me show it to you. I have to add those two collections, members and children, to the payload config. And if we switch back, thanks to hot module reloading, they're already there. Let's create a member. Click on new. I'm just going to say member 1. So as you can see right now here, it's trying to load and you cannot create a child right now. The reason for that is our member doesn't have an ID yet. So if we would create a child here, it wouldn't know what ID it should link it to. So I'll have to click on save first. And now as you can see, now I can create a new child within that component. So I'm going to call it child 1. And as you can see, it already has automatically linked our parent here. I'm going to fill in this field here, unnecessary information. It will become important later. So I'm just going to say, hi, this field is irrelevant. I'm going to click on save. And now as you can see, I have a nice table here that shows me all children that are linked to this member. I can even specify the columns, maybe remove one or add another one. I can also add a new one. As you can see, it created the child in our children collection. Next up is on-demand React server components. Now this is a game changer pretty much. So up until Payload version 2.0, which was just an Express app, you could only create client components. That way you could create a custom component, render it in the admin panel, but this custom component was rendered on a client side. So if you wanted to load some information, you would have to fetch from the Payload API and load it in an asynchronous way, basically. Now with the version 3.0, Payload obviously introduced the app router, and the app router supports React server components. Now the problem was, up until the more or less latest beta versions, those React server components were kind of static. They were generated on build, and they didn't actually have the document data to show. So while in theory you could create a server component, you would still have to additionally create a client component that then again fetches the information from the API or through the local API to actually do something or to show actual values. And this has changed now. Let me show you how. So if we go back into our code base, in collections, I'm just going to create a UI folder and paste in a custom children component. Now this will just replace our join field basically. So we go to members. I'm just commenting that in. This is, by the way, one thing that has changed from previous versions as well. If you want to import custom components, you now have to specify the actual path to import them and not just directly import them at the top. The reason for that is Payload now has something called an import map. So it basically generates this map so that it knows specifically which components to import and which ones basically to leave out. This will reduce bundle size, reduce compile times, everything. So just keep that in mind. In our custom component, what we are doing is basically just displaying user information and the children as before in the join field. The new part about that is our server component. So as you can see, this is a server component. It's an async function, receives different props. So we have the data prop, which contains the full data of the document. We have our user prop, which contains the user information. And we also have the payload prop, which we can just use to actually use the local API. I will comment this out for now. So let's just go back into our payload admin panel and see how this looks in members, member one. Okay, so now instead of the default join field, we're displaying our custom component. And as you can see, without any fetching from the client, anything, this is generated on the server. We can basically display the user information. So I have our email, I have the collection of the user and our login attempts, and we can also display the children. Now, what I had to do in order to actually display the information is I had to populate the children, because this data did only contain the ID of every child and not the full data. So what I did is I used the payload object here to do a find operation through the local API on the server. So this doesn't happen on the client. And this queries the children collection where the parent equals the ID of the document and then displays them. So this is a huge game changer, as I said, because you can now write custom components a lot more efficiently and also load faster. You don't have to build any loaders, everything, because it will be generated on the server side and just sent to the client. Let's continue with the select API, which is a very neat feature as well. If we go back into our admin panel, as you can see, I'm displaying the unnecessary information here. So this is the field value that I typed in. Hi, this field is irrelevant. And this is shown because in my query here, I'm basically just fetching all information about the child. Now, what is new is I can now have a select property where I can either include or exclude specific fields. So in this case, I have excluded the unnecessary info field, but I could also just include this. So this would exclusively include this field. Now, because I've excluded this from the query, if I reload and go back into my admin panel, now the field is gone because payload actually keeps it out of the data. This way, it makes it very easy to reduce the size of your responses, the size of the JSON that is sent across networks. It will optimize performance, pretty much everything. This actually reminds me of GraphQL, but without the strict boundaries of typings and an exact schema, because you can basically opt in whenever you need it and leave it out whenever you just want to fetch all data. Next up, another huge feature: tasks, workflows, jobs, and queues. This one I'm not going to explain in the code, because if I go into detail about this, the video will be 2 hours long. Payload basically now comes with a way for you to define specific tasks and schedule them and put them in a queue. Let me explain to you by giving you an example. This example, by the way, comes from our newsletter. If you haven't subscribed to that yet, feel free to do so. The link is down in the description. It's completely free. We just send out an email every maybe 3 weeks. Basically, whenever there's something interesting and new to talk about. The goal is just to keep you updated with everything important that is happening in the Payload ecosystem. So again, if you are interested in that, feel free to check the description. So let's start with a task. A task is basically a simple function that you define. For example, send email, and you declare a specific input, a specific output. You can also declare specific success operations if the task succeeds or if the task fails. So as an example, we're going to take the send email task with 2 inputs, the email and the HTML that should be sent. Now, a workflow is basically multiple tasks in a row. So you can think of it as a recipe. For example, you first send an email and then you create an appointment. So those are hard-coded into the payload config file. And as I said, they don't actually do something. They're just they're just recipes they can later call with a job. So a job is an actual execution instance of a task or a workflow. So for example, you can create a job that specifies the task send email, and you can give it the inputs hello world as the HTML or text, and the test@test.com as the email recipient. The cool part about this is jobs can also be scheduled. So you can specify the wait until property on a job. So for example, you can set it to next Monday. So that way the job won't get executed before next Monday. Last but not least, a queue is a literal queue that you can add your job to. So for example, our job send hello world to test@test.com. We can put that in a queue. We can either put it in the default queue, or Payload also supports multiple queues. So for example, the default queue and the email queue. And those can be queried separately. And the idea behind that is that you set up a cron job, for example, that is called every 5 minutes, that checks the email queue and sends out, you can define the next 10 emails or the next 100 emails, no matter what you want to specify, and just basically handles them asynchronously. So that way you have a possibility, like I said, to schedule tasks, to run tasks in the background, heavy tasks that would otherwise block your thread basically and slow down the main payload response times or the way that the admin URL feels. So you can basically just offload that to an async worker. This is also very, very handy if you want to sync data to a vector database, etc. Next up, there is locking documents while editing. Now this is a smaller feature, but it has been requested a lot and it's also very, very handy. If we go back into our project, I will create a second user real quick. So I'm going to say dev2 all about payload.com, same bad password. I'm going to click on save. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up an incognito window. No, first of all, I'm going into my code and I'm activating the locking. So in members, we can now for every collection specify a lock documents attribute. We can either just set it to true or set the duration in seconds. 300 is, I think, 5 minutes. So this means that if someone edits the document and leaves it idle, it will stay locked for the next 5 minutes, and then it will be free again for other people to edit. So let's just recompile real quick and reload just to make sure. I'm going into members, into member 1, and I'm actually editing something. So if I go into a new incognito window, I open up the same project here, dev2 at all about payload.com. So I'm pretending to be another person right now. And if I go into members, you can see there's now a lock here and it says dev is editing. Now if I click on it, it won't allow me to. It will say document is locked. However, what I can do is I can either view it in read only, or I can also say I'm going to take over, and this will basically block the other person to edit. Although this is kind of rude because it might lead to the other person losing their changes. So in this case, I'm just going to click on view read only, and now I can't edit anything. I can see it, but not edit it. This is very handy because in prior versions, if you had two people working on kind of the same data at the same time, they would often overwrite each other, which is obviously not a good thing. All right, next up, custom block looks. So in order to demonstrate it to you, what I'm going to do is I'm going back into members, and we're going to pretend that we now have a CV field. So every member basically has a CV where he specifies what he has been doing for his life so far. So for this, I'm going to import those lexical features, also the custom block. I'm going to create 2 other files that I'm going to explain in a second. The key part is, what we're doing here is we're using the rich text field with the new lexical rich text editor, and we're extending our editor to include a custom block. Because now you can't only just, write normal text, headings, whatever. You can also embed payload blocks into your rich text, which is pretty cool in and of itself. Now, our custom block that I just pasted in here, sorry, the schema. Our custom block is very simple. It just has an array of positions that you've had over the years, and each position has a title and a description. I'm going to comment out this custom block for now, so I can show it to you in the admin panel. If we go back into here, sorry, I'm leaving my incognito modus. So let's add a simple CV, including the custom blocks. I'm going to say my positions so far. And here I'm going to create a custom block and add positions. So I'm going to say, I don't know, 1900, I was CTO, and in 2010, I became CEO. Okay, I'm just going to click on save. And as you can see, this view is nice, but it doesn't really represent how the information will be structured in the front end. And it's not very efficient for the space that it takes up. So now what you can do, we can basically go ahead and replace this entire block in here and display it differently and have a custom block. So in order to do this, I'm going to comment my custom block back in here. And this is basically just a custom React component that receives specific props. So we can import specific props that the lexical rich text editor gives us. For example, the block edit button and the block remove button, but also some others. All this does is it also receives the data attribute as the other custom blocks, and it maps through data positions and just displays them in a nice way. And I also added the edit button and the remove button on the top right side. So let's check how this looks like. We will have to refresh this once. So now our clunky custom block is gone and we just have a nicely rendered UI component here. Obviously, this is meant to be edited in here. So you could implement like a what you see is what you get editor kind of experience, but we can also use those two buttons here. So I could either remove the block or click on edit custom block. And in this case, it will just open up the actual editing in here. I can just edit it. So I can say 1990, which is probably a bit more realistic, save changes. This didn't re-render now. I will probably have to implement some kind of custom logic for it, but it should have saved it. Yeah. So now it's 1990. This is a very nice way how you can improve the user experience or the editor experience in your lexical rich text. Before we dive into the exciting upcoming features, let's quickly talk about the base list filter as well. This is a way for you to tell Payload which documents to show in the admin panel by default. This is very handy if you want to implement, for example, soft deletes. Now, to show you what it does is I will have to uncomment the deleted attribute. So basically adding it to the members config. And I also have to uncomment the base list filter. And there's a small error here because this actually needs to be a function that then returns this filter. So let's check in our admin panel. I'm having member 1 here and I set the deleted attribute to true. If I click on save and I go back to members, the member is gone. Now to show you that it is still there, actually, I'm going to comment out the filter again. And it should already have refreshed and it is visible again. So like I said, this is very handy if you want to implement soft deletes. We will probably create a separate quick tutorial how you can actually implement soft deletes to give them a native feel in Payload without having to create a lot of custom components and everything. All right, now let's continue with the upcoming features. First of all, this has been requested a million times, folder view for upload collections. And we're also very, very happy and grateful that it has been decided that the folder views are in the open source version and not enterprise only plugin. So they have been under active development already, and the Payload team said they will release it in around a month. There's also a real-time image resizing API on the way. So not just the static sizes that you could define in an upload collection on images, but basically a real-time and on-demand service where you can resize images. Also, there's a real-time API being developed. This is very, very handy for example, live collaboration. And last but not least, also an import-export feature. So in the future, at the top of every collection, you will have an import and an export button that can basically import or export files to CSV and Excel and back. Now, this will be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions about the features that I just talked about, or you have any other constructive feedback, please let us know down in the comments below. And apart from that, take care and see you soon in the next video.